Joining me now to get through the political stories of the day is Shadow Home Affairs and Cyber Security Minister James Paterson. Senator, thank you for your time. Firstly, your reaction to the Prime Minister's refusal there to promise that those Stage 3 tax cuts will come into effect in July.
Well, it's good to see the Prime Minister getting some tough questions and follow-up questions on the ABC, but I agree with your analysis in your editorial, Caleb. I think the Prime Minister is trying to leave himself wiggle room to walk away from this very clear election commitment that he made, and that they do reserve the right to make changes in the budget in May before these tax cuts come into force on the 1st of July. I mean, it was exposed in Capital Brief last week, a story by Anthony Galloway and his colleagues through an FOI request that the Treasurer Jim Chalmers asked his department to cost options for changing the tax cuts. Now, why would you do that if you didn't intend to do it? But let's make no mistake, this would be a very significant broken promise because it was very clearly committed to by the Prime Minister, and it is already legislated. It will come into effect on 1 July. They have to put legislation through the Parliament. They have to repeal the tax cuts or change them in order to reverse this, and that would amount to a tax increase for many, many Australians who are counting on this at a time when they're facing very serious cost of living pressures.
Correct. And you've got to take, the words of the Prime Minister at face value, and that is that the position hasn't changed. Now, I believe him. The position hasn't changed right now, but how hard is it to say it won't change? And there's only one reason that you wouldn't do that. And also, as I mentioned at the top of the show, Chris Bowen is out today calling for Peter Dutton to explain if there will be a 2035 emission reduction target as part of the Coalition's election platform. You've had a number of Coalition MPs voicing their reservations about the policy. Here he was.
It's time for him to stop the nonsense, to get on with announcing some policies, tell us what his climate change and energy policy is. I'm very clear. We'll have a 2035 target. It'll be very clear to the Australian people before the election what it is. On their more honest moments, concede that nuclear has no realistic possibility of being anywhere near up and running by 2030 in Australia.
What's your view, James? Should the Coalition take a 2035 emissions reduction target to an election?
We'll announce our comprehensive energy and climate change policies well before the next election, but the last person we'll be taking any advice from about how to do that would be Chris Bowen, because he is presiding over right now an unmitigated disaster in the energy market, which is driving up costs for households, which is driving up costs for business. We saw the refinery in Western Australia at Alcoa announce a closure this week, costing hundreds of jobs on his watch as Energy Minister, and one of the factors was the increased cost of energy that they'll be facing. And of course, we saw this week the the federal government veto the Victorian government's signature offshore wind construction, which has just blown a hole in his 2030 target of 82% renewables, which no one who's looked at this, who's a serious person, thinks is achievable. So Chris Bowen is literally the last person on the planet we would be seeking policy advice from when it comes to energy and climate. And Ted O'Brien is doing an outstanding job and will announce our policies in good time.
I don't doubt that at all, but what is your personal view? Should there be a target?
Well, we'll come to that in due course. I'm not going to foreshadow another colleague's portfolio area before the Shadow Cabinet has agreed to it, and on a policy issue that the government hasn't even articulated their promise. Chris Bowen set up this false test. He hasn't even said what their 2035 target is, but he expects the opposition to nominate what ours is. So there's plenty of time in this term before the next election. It will be announced in due course, and Ted O'Brien and the Shadow Cabinet will agree to that, and the party room will endorse it.
Let's hope the right decision is made. Let's move on to the detainee saga now. The Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has denied claims today of a cover-up after refusing to reveal if more convicted criminals have been released from immigration detention over the summer. Take a listen.
There's been absolutely no change in any of the policy and the information that was given under the former government when Peter Dutton was the Minister for Home Affairs. No change whatsoever.
So how many criminals have been released?
Well, there's been no change whatsoever when
sorry, that's not the question. The question is how many?
Well, the Federal Department provide the information at the appropriate time in the same way that they always have.
I mean, the dude sounds like a broken record today. There's no change anywhere if you listen to the Prime Minister. Again, why can't he just answer the question?
That was an embarrassing performance this morning from the Prime Minister. Either he doesn't know or he thinks the Australian people are so stupid that he'll get away with answers like that. The truth is there has been a change. In December, Border Force was publishing a weekly report on the number of detainees released into the community, and now they've stopped doing so and say they will publish it with another unrelated report on a monthly basis well after the fact. And the Prime Minister wasn't able to answer basic, straightforward questions about this. He's got his Home Affairs Minister on extended leave. He's got his Immigration Minister who's acting as the Home Affairs Minister, but apparently in witness protection because he hasn't been doing any media or answering any questions or doing any press conferences about this. This is a total shambles and a cover-up, and it's obvious why. The government is embarrassed by its own failures. It's been unwilling and unprepared to deal with these issues. It hasn't even used, as far as we can tell, the preventative detention scheme that the Parliament rushed through by Christmas to protect the community, to get the most hardened criminals off the streets. It's time the Minister came back from the holidays, got their feet behind the desk, made applications to the court to get these dangerous criminals out of the community and to protect us.
Well, they've hived that off to some panel now too, because, you know, you always need someone to blame. And the most common person that seems to be blamed for everything at the moment is Peter Dutton. And so it was again today, because it's been revealed that the number of people failing the Australian citizenship test has surged under this government. The pass rate has fallen to 65% compared to 80% under the coalition between 2017 and 2021. Predictably, the government has blamed the changes that your government made to the test in 2020 for this. Why do you think that the pass rate has fallen so starkly?
Well, before the last election, as opposition leader, Anthony Albanese said he would show up and he would take responsibility. He wouldn't shift blame, he would fix the problems. Well, this is not doing that. It's not taking responsibility. It's not showing up. He's not even across the problems. It's pretty clear from the media reporting today that the reason for this crash in testing scores under the Labor Party is that the questions that are being failed are the values questions. And that's actually quite a worrying thing. If there are potential migrants to our country who want to come here and make their home here, that's great. But you've got to sign up to and understand our values. And if you don't, you shouldn't pass the citizenship test. But this government's doing nothing at all to promote those values, to educate people about those values, to inculcate those values. And it's no surprise that many migrants are now failing the test on values questions. And what we need from the Minister for Home Affairs, from the Minister for Immigration, again, is a plan to teach these values to future migrants so that they can not just pass the test, but be great Australians who contribute to and uphold the values of this country.
And just very quickly before we go to the break, Peter Dutton, of course, has been calling for tougher hate speech laws to stop anti-Semitism. You've had Jewish leaders this week saying that they're looking at running legal cases against clerics. They would have to foot the bill. Dutton has said they shouldn't have to foot the bill. The government has been completely out of action on this.
I just cannot understand, Caleb, why neither the federal government or the state government has tried to test the extensive anti-incitement laws that we already have on the books at the federal level and the state level to see where any of these hate preachers have violated the law. Now, if those cases were tried and if they failed, I think there is a good case to toughen up those incitement laws. I think there is a good case to make sure that people like that can be prosecuted when they incite violence against others in the community. But those laws are already on the books and there's nothing to stop the federal or state governments taking those cases to court right now, and I think that's a deeply disturbing thing. We have a crisis of anti-Semitism in this country. It is absolutely rife. It is off the charts. The Jewish community feels unsafe. We even have Jewish Australians publicly saying that they think they might feel safer in Israel, which is under attack from terrorist organisations, than they would in Sydney and Melbourne. That's a shocking indictment on our country, but particularly on the Prime Minister and his government for their inaction to protect the Jewish community.
It's just gutless. As you say, laws do exist, but no one seems to be willing to try them out. At least run a case. And if the case fails in court, there will be a public outrage and then the law will have to change. I just don't see how you can lose out of doing it. James Paterson, thank you so much for your time.